Check the description for the following discount codes. I'm sure a lot of you saw my review of the Pimax Crystal, maybe 9-10 days ago, whenever it was. And it's hard to review a product that isn't really finished yet. I'm not talking about problems. I'm talking about its actual off-the-shelf functionality. Standalone mode doesn't work. The eye tracking with automatic IPD doesn't work. These just aren't ready yet. The headset's been released and these features don't yet work. So dynamic foveated rendering obviously doesn't work because no eye tracking. 120 Hertz mode is only like a lab option that doesn't work properly. It's not smooth. So, some of the major selling points and some of the major reasons that this is so heavy, which is a standalone mode, having this battery in the back, doesn't actually work yet. So it's a bit weird reviewing something like that, but that's what they've sent out to us. This is how you get it if you buy it right now. And it's that out-of-box experience that we as reviewers have to share. If I bought this today, Carl, what would my experience be like? Would it be comfortable? Would it work well? How's the tracking? How's the software? Was it easy to get it up and running? All these things are what you guys need to know as a consumer. Because just addressing a couple of comments from the last video, some people were like, oh, Carl, you should have spent more time with Pimax technical support. Well, I spent 4 or 5 hours back and forward, 3 or 4 different PDF documents they sent me with troubleshooting guides and things to do. That's far over and above what you should have to do for an off-the-shelf product that's $1,500 or whatever it is. It should, for the most part, just work, Yes, this is the world of PC and VR, and things aren't always plug and play. But the difference between a little bit of ball ache and hours upon hours and it still doesn't work properly, and all the stuff that happened in the previous video, the connection issues and what have you. Anyway, there's been firmware and software updates since I did that video, so I thought let's get those downloaded and installed and let's see what happens. And we'll go into that in a second. There's just one other comment actually I want to address. Talking about this being heavy, it weighs about 1,200 grams, 1.2 kilos, right? That's like 2.5 times almost the weight of a Pico 4 and more than double the weight of a Quest 2, which are both standalone headsets with batteries in. So that makes this very, very heavy. When the rest of the VR world are trying to go smaller and lighter, Pimax, it looks just like they've reused their existing chassis and their existing straps and audio solutions, rather than trying to make things smaller and lighter like everyone else is, which is of course what we want. Now previously, having this great big wide headset was kind of acceptable because you got a huge field of view with it, but this time you don't. This has a field of view of about 103 degrees, give or take, proximity to your face, which is the same as a Pico 4, again, give or take, and only a few degrees more than a Quest 2. So you've got all this extra bulk and width, but you don't gain any FOV, and that's evident when you put it on and you use it. So I feel just like I'm in this, in almost any other VR headset apart from the earlier Pimax ones. So, in my opinion, all this weight, 1.2 kilos with these optional speakers, is just not the way things should be going forwards. It should be the opposite. Smaller, lighter, more efficient, more comfortable. Using this in the first-person shooter, which I've actually now got footage of, and I'm able to show you, because with, one more very quick point then to address comments. A couple of people said, and these are probably Pimax Crystal owners, said to me, Carl, when you demonstrated that it's front heavy, you had your finger at the back like this, and you were showing that it was front heavy. If you put your finger in the middle, then it's perfectly balanced. So here's my finger in the middle, and it's definitely not perfectly balanced. I'll even put my finger further and further forward. Let's go as far forward as I can. It's still very much front heavy, look. So that's that argument settled. It's not a well-balanced headset. And that's without the cable even being attached, which will actually add more weight to the front of your headset. So, if you own one of these, there's no point coming in the comments and just making stuff up. Everyone can see, plain as day, it is not a well-balanced headset. It's just one of those things. We can all see that it's the same chassis and strap that they've always used, and we can all put it on a pair of scales and see that it weighs double, if not double and a bit more, than most other standalone headsets without any FOV gain. So they're not things that can be argued or like, oh, well, my one's not like that, Carl, mine's perfectly balanced. No, it isn't. It's exactly the same as the one I've got in my hand. So there's no need to pretend. I know people like to protect their purchase decisions and what have you, but some things like the weight and the balance and the FOV just can't be argued because they're physical attributes of the headset. Now, the other issues I had, and the primary issues, was the fact that it would not connect with other USB devices plugged in. Managed to get it working with just my keyboard and mouse. It would still keep disconnecting on this PC upstairs. It's an AMD based system, 5800X with a RTX 3080 graphics card, 64 gig of RAM. The machine downstairs wouldn't connect at all, no matter what I did. Everything unplugged. Oh, and also, we've just one display plugged in as well, in case they were going to cause issues. Downstairs wouldn't connect at all. So, did the firmware update, which, let me just have a look, pop that up on the screen, in actual fact, and show you what version it is. So I was on 1.2.2, and the newest version at the time of recording is 1.3.0. Now, that took about 30 attempts to actually get that to update because it just kept failing. Don't ask me why, it just did. Eventually though, it did it. Now, as you can see here, update successed. Interesting word, didn't know that existed. I think it's supposed to say succeeded, but we'll take successed because it was a success. So, and I did that using the latest Pimax Play software because there was an update for that as well, which is here, and it says 1.14.0, which confused me initially because the version I had installed was 1.14.03, but the date on this said 16th of August, and I'm like, well, that's newer than when I did the review, and I haven't played with it since, so it must be newer. But then when it was installing, as you can see here, it's actually 1.14.04.1.04. So it is actually newer. Now, what's most important here is that it's actually made a difference. Both the firmware and the software updates I didn't try them independently of one another. I just thought, let's get the latest software on there and the latest firmware on the headset. And there was some for the controllers as well. Have I got a screenshot of that? Yes, I have. There it is. So controllers are now on version 0.8.22, both of those. So everything is bang up to date at the time of recording. As I say, it did take about 30 attempts to get the firmware to update on the headset. The controllers, or handles as they call them in the Pimax software, updated without any problems. So, what's it like with these updates? Well, the connection up here is now much more stable. I'm able to leave all my other USB devices plugged in and all of my other displays. Now I have to unplug one of my displays because I don't have enough display ports with my triple screens plugged in to then plug in another display port. I have 3 display ports and an HDMI, which is what the desk monitor here is plugged into. So I had to unplug one of those. But yes, now I can leave all my USB devices plugged in, all my sim racing gear and my displays, and it is a reliable, solid, for the most part, connection. I did have it drop out once or twice, but over a testing period of maybe 4 or 5 hours, once or twice was a lot better than every 2 minutes, which is what it was doing before. And what I discovered was, and I did try it without any other USB devices plugged in as well, and that made no difference. We still get the odd disconnect. And what I found was, if I clicked restart service, which you see on the screenshot here, it would then come back to life. Now that is restarting the Pimax service in Windows. So it's not like me unplugging the USB and plugging it back in again, or me restarting the PC. I'm not turning the headset on and off. I'm just restarting the Pimax software essentially. So that points to this sort of connectivity issue and unreliability being a software problem rather than a hardware issue. Now this isn't 100%, but usually if it's a hardware issue that's having problems, powering up and powering down the hardware, i.e. the headset, unplugging the USB, plugging it in again, is what would usually resolve the issue. When you restart a piece of software, you exit out of it, you load it back up again, that points to it being the software more than the hardware. Not always, I'm sure there's some of you out there who will be like, oh no, it can still be the hardware. It definitely can still be the hardware, but we're talking sort of like most of the time it would point to it being software rather than hardware. And again, I've had a firmware and a software update, and now, in fact, let's put it up now, there's footage of me sat in my sim rig with a Pimax Crystal on, doing some sim racing, which is something that I couldn't do, you know, only 10, 12 days ago, because it wouldn't stay connected long enough. Now, I didn't get kicked out of any races. I didn't have the floor level randomly jump up throughout a race like I did when I was testing this before. You might remember I mentioned the floor level wouldn't stay the same. Sometimes it would be like I'd fall below it and be floating in nothingness. Other times I'd be 22 foot high with my head poking out the ceiling. It stayed consistent, except once when I actually removed the headset after a race, hung it on the little handle on the side of my rig, got up, went to the toilet, come back, put the headset on, and lo and behold, I was sat through the bottom of the car. So that isn't 100% cured, and again, nor is the connectivity issues, because I did have it drop out once or twice in my testing. What happened more than it dropping out, to be honest, is it just not connecting in the first place, and me having to power cycle either the PC or the headset. But once it seemed to get a connection, now it seems to keep it for the most part. And if it doesn't, a restart of the Pimax service seems to bring it back to life. So it is a big improvement over what it was. Now, the actual sim racing experience is really, it's really not that much different to using most of the other headsets on the market that are relatively modern with high resolution displays. Yes, of course, the blacks are really good and the colors are vibrant. It's not the brightest of displays, but you know, and the lenses are really clear. But the real issue is with most sim racing titles, you can't run the visuals up that high in game. So that it kind of levels the playing field a little bit, because no matter what headset I use, whether it's this, whether it's a Reverb G2, whether it's a Valve Index, a Quest 2, a Pico, perhaps not quite a Rift S, I was about to say Rift S. In fact, not really the Valve Index either, because they're quite low resolution headsets, so you get screen door effect. But any of the more modern ones with higher resolutions, there's not that much in it, really. You know, these displays are really, and when these displays really shone for me was when I was doing some first-person shooter downstairs, which if I haven't put a clip up of, I will do now. That's when I really noticed the clarity, the sharpness, you know, the lack of screen door effect over and above sim racing. I think for me, for sim racing, I would still probably choose something like a G2 because it's way lighter, way more comfortable, doesn't have a battery that you need to change, and for the most part, it just works. So that's probably what I'd go for. But my experience in sim racing was perfectly fine, apart from that one time I took the headset off and the floor height changed. The headset tracking is flawless in my experience. In fact, I don't think I'll have put the first-person shooter footage up yet because I'm still talking about sim racing. I'll do it in a bit if I haven't. Who knows? Yeah, the head tracking was absolutely fine. I had no issues with my head tracking whatsoever. The controller tracking, on the other hand, there goes those horrible vibration motors. The controller tracking, on the other hand, is pretty terrible. Now, when I reviewed this like just shy of 2 weeks ago, because I had such little time between disconnects, I didn't get a proper chance to experience this because everything was so quick. It's like get it fired up, you know, have a good look around, check everything, is it all working, how it should do, how do things look, blah, blah, blah. I didn't really notice the tracking being an issue, but it could also be that this tracking problem is now because of the new firmware, either in the headset or the controllers or the new software. So I don't actually know, but what I can tell you is the tracking right now is pretty terrible. If I now show you some footage of me playing Zero Caliber downstairs, and so yeah, so this is the other thing, with this new software and firmware, it's now connecting to the downstairs PC. I did have to find the only USB port on the motherboard that it liked, but once I did, it worked fine with all my other USB devices plugged in, which was a shock. So that's both PCs working with all other USB devices plugged in at the same time. The downstairs PC is also an AMD-based system, 3800X with a RTX 2080. That did experience more disconnects throughout play. In fact, you may even see one in some of this footage than what my upstairs PC did. I don't know why that is, it just did. Other random things that happened was when you fire up the Pimax software, my display, my monitor colours would go all funny and quite dark, and they would stay like it until you exited out of the Pimax software, and then it'd go back to normal. It only affected like the monitor or the TV downstairs that I was looking at. It didn't affect anything in the headset. It was a bit weird. You could shut the Pimax software down, fire it back up again, and then it wouldn't do it. Like the headset would be connected and working, and the display would look exactly as it should. So these firmware and software updates have definitely worked. I also got to try the powered USB hub prior to doing the software and firmware updates. Didn't make any difference, still wouldn't connect downstairs, still was just as unreliable upstairs. And Pimax actually said, if you're having connection issues, don't use this. But I thought, try it anyway. But that didn't make any difference. What else has changed with your software and firmware? So it now mostly remembers, like I say, the floor height and doesn't lose that as often. But when I restart the PC or turn this on or off, I still have to do the room setup every time. And that's on both PCs, upstairs and downstairs, which is a bit of a pain. It's not really an issue for sim racing because you can just skip it, and you know, you don't need to set up a Guardian boundary in SteamVR or anything like that, because you just sat in a seat and you can just, in Steam, you can just reset your position and then you're good to go. So not too much of an issue, but still shouldn't be like that really. But yeah, so overall with this new firmware and software updates, we have seen some big improvements. It's just got really dark here in case I look super dark on the camera. It's a really sunny day and now all of a sudden the sun isn't out. In fact, let me just turn this light up here a little bit so you can see me a tiny bit better. Yeah, so overall with the latest firmware and software at the time of recording, things have come on a long way. My initial, sort of comment about I wouldn't recommend it still stands, because for all the trade-offs, the 1.2 kilos in unbalanced weight, the fact that you need to have a battery in when it's not even a standalone headset yet, all this extra width and bulk that comes along with that weight that doesn't actually give you a wider FOV like the previous generation ones did, along with connectivity issues, does not really balance out, the nice clear displays. Now, Tariel Wood, who's an excellent VR tech reviewer, did a review of this a couple of days ago, and I watched that, and he actually had more issues than what I did. They sent him over one headset, and it just wouldn't work at all. They were just freezing and all sorts of problems. You've got his video, I'll link in the description because it's a really cool video, He doesn't do just, he's mostly VR, he does a little bit of sim racing, he's got a rig, but it's a VR tech channel. But yeah, so they had to send him a second one, and the second one suffered, it's off the top of my head, I meant to write a list. He had barrel distortion, which made him feel sick. Now, barrel distortion is so virtual reality images are rendered in like a barrel shape. If you were to look at them on a flat display, and if you're into VR in the early days, you'd have seen this, because on our PCs, it would look like the images would be two of them, and they would be barrel shaped, like curved, because the lenses are pincushion lenses, which is the opposite of a barrel shape, and so the lenses have to be counted for by rendering it as a barrel shaped image. And when you then look through pincushion lenses, it's flat and the world looks as it should. Now, Ty in his video said he was getting barrel distortion and it was making him feel physically ill, which is, really quite strange. And on top of that, he had USB connectivity issues, poor tracking, chromatic aberration around the edges of the lenses. Now, I don't get any barrel distortion and I don't get any chromatic aberration. And again, this is what we sort of laugh about as the Pimax lottery, a little bit like with the Pico 4s when they were first released. Some of them seem to be okay, other people seem to get a huge list of problems, from dead pixels to mismatched brightnesses and all sorts. And Pimax has been like this. In fact, this is another thing I see in the comments, there's a lot of people out there that don't seem to realise the history of Pimax, and that with all their previous headsets, this experience is exactly what you get. For a lot of people, it's nothing but a long list of ball ache and problems, literally from not working at all to the odd niggle with a disconnection. And that's just how it's always been. And you know, it's kind of what I expected with this headset, and it's exactly what we've got. So, you know, we laugh and call it the Pimax lottery. Do you get a good experience? Do you not? That is literally how it is, you know. And it's not because I don't want to like Pimax headsets. I'm a VR enthusiast. I love VR, and if someone releases a new headset, I want to get it, I want to try it out, and I want it to be great. You know, I want my experience to be excellent and go, wow, this is the next best thing in VR. But what we've got here is a headset that is physically the same as all the previous Pimax headsets, with just nicer displays and no larger field of view. So it's not that leap forward. Someone also mentioned about cutting edge technology. There isn't anything cutting edge in this headset. You know, the displays are cutting edge, but everything else has been done elsewhere, whether it be foveated rendering, dynamic foveated rendering, eye tracking, 120 hertz. None of that's new. That's all been around for a good few years in other headsets. And you know, those things don't actually work yet, in fact. Along with the standalone mode. Standalone VR headsets are not new. The Quest 1, you know, was the first mass-produced standalone headset from a few years ago. So they haven't done anything new here, aside from new lenses and displays, which do look really, really nice. But everything else just still takes away from that. So, you know, I still can't really recommend it as an upgrade to existing headsets, you know, if you've got something, because it needs to be reliable first and foremost. And secondly, it needs to be comfortable. And even if this is comfortable on your face and your head, as in it fits well, it still weighs 1,200 grams, 1.2 kilos, more than double most other standalone headsets. So Pimax are obviously working as hard as they can on these firmware and software updates to address the issues, which is great, because I've now had, you know, the ability to sit there and do some sim racing, do some first-person shooters. Again, because of the weight of this thing, it's not really suitable for first-person shooters, and the fact you've got a cable attached to you as well. I haven't played a first-person shooter with a cable attached to me for years, and it was incredibly annoying. Getting caught around my legs, getting caught on my ear, just... I'm so used to being able to, you know, spin around and squat down and just do whatever I want without having to think, where's this cable? So that really is a drawback. And again, this is technically a standalone headset. So whenever they enable that standalone functionality, that cable can be unplugged, and then I'll be able to enjoy the nice crisp displays in some first-person shooters and some other titles. But as I say, it still, because of its bulk and the weight at the front, this is another thing. So it'll move around on your head basically when you're being quite aggressive. So it would be no use for sports titles, boxing or any of the VR fitness type stuff. No use whatsoever, because it will move around. Or you'll have to crank that head strap up so tight it will be uncomfortable. What I did notice is if you move it ever so slightly up, down, left or right from sort of the optimal position. I don't want to say sweet spot, because with these lenses, you can look around with your eyes and it's all in focus. But weirdly, if you move the headset just a little bit up or down, then you see the image distorting. And you haven't got to move it much. It's only a tiny little bit up or down, left or right. And you literally see things start to bend. I mean, maybe that's what Ty was talking about with the barrel distortion. I'm not sure. But it has to sit in just the right place. And as I say, it's not clarity, because you can look around with your eyes and all like edge to edge clarity is excellent. You know, that's really good. But yeah, there was this weird, you move it around a little bit and it's like, oh dear, that made me feel a bit, but not too much of an issue for sim racing, but first person shooters, fitness titles, with the weight of it and the front heaviness, not really suitable for that. I mean, really, this is only really suitable, in my opinion, for flight sim or sim racing. All other types of VR, it's just too heavy, and too bulky, too front heavy, and it needs to sit in just the right spot or things start to warp a little bit. But, I mean, I haven't tried it in Microsoft Flight Simulator yet, but I will do, just out of curiosity. But again, the issue with sim racing and flight sim titles is being able to run the visuals high enough to get a good experience out of these lenses, because if you have to run things on low and they start looking a bit like a PlayStation 1 and you can see the jagged edges because you can't have your anti-aliasing on, or you can't have your render resolution high enough, then that really takes away from the fact that it's got lovely lenses and lovely displays. I mean, the blacks are still black and the colours are still vibrant, but seeing things rendered at a low resolution really does take away from it. I mean, I've got a 3080 here, like I say, I can't afford or justify the money for a 4090, certainly not at the moment. And I mean, again, that only puts, if people have a 4090, probably in the top 5% of users. You know, there'll be more people with something like a 3080 than there will with a 4090. And so from a potential purchasing point of view, you don't get the best out of it in sim titles. This is first-person shooters and other VR games. You can, because for some reason sim racing titles are very demanding, along with Microsoft Flight Simulator. But yeah, the moment I stepped into some Zero Caliber or some Half-Life Alyx, well, there we go. Those displays and lenses really did shine, which is, I mean, and they are beautiful. There's no getting away from it. They are really very good. But no, I'm, like I mentioned a minute ago, I'm a VR enthusiast. I don't have any allegiance to any brands. I've got a link to this in the description, and from all my other reviews with a discount code for Pimax. I'll get a small affiliate commission if people buy Pimax stuff, but that still doesn't affect how I review them. And do I have with a Pico? No, I don't with Pico, but I certainly don't with Meta or Oculus Meta these days. But things get reviewed for how they are, regardless of how it affects me. But yeah, I would love for this. What I want to see is these lenses and displays in something the size of a Pico 4, and that will be that will be something special. And I look forward to the Quest 3 and seeing what that brings to the table as well. Anyway, enough waffle. The main point of the video is the new software and the new firmware has made a big difference. It's now pretty much 99% reliable on my upstairs PC and probably about 75% reliable on my downstairs PC. So if connectivity issues was what's putting you off buying one, they're definitely being improved. If it was other things like the size, the weight, the balance, the lack of FOV for its size, the price, the fact that you've got a cable and a battery, then obviously that's never going to change because they're all physical attributes. Anyway, enough waffle. Thank you very much for watching, and take it easy.